Welcome back, everybody, to the NCAA Next Up Dynasty here on NCAA Football 14. Today we've got week 7, 8, and 9 here in year number 2 of the series. Before we get started, I have a small announcement regarding the league, I guess. So something I started up last episode through my Discord server was a pick'em for my subscribers and Discord members to pick a couple games per week, and whoever gets the most right at the end of the season is going to get some small reward or something. I haven't figured out what that's going to be yet. So if you want to participate in the pick'em going forward for the rest of the season, make sure to go join my Discord. The link is in the description. All right, let's talk about what happened briefly in the last episode and what we can expect here today as we are now towards the middle of the season. Notre Dame was number 1 in week 6, but they lost, so Clemson takes the top spot. Not a lot of undefeated teams left. Obviously, Kentucky, Middle Tennessee State, and Penn State still in the top 10. And then going down even further, there really are not many unbeatens left. Houston and TCU have kind of entered the fold recently, leading the Big 12. They play against each other in week 8, which should be a really fun matchup. The Heisman race has just been drunk, really, since the start of the season. It feels like every week there's 3 new players in the race. Georgia's backup running back, Keith Humphrey, is the current favorite, with Sanders, McDonald, Gordon, and Kirkstead currently rounding out the top 5. I really wouldn't be surprised by, at the end of week 9, that maybe 1 or 2 of those guys is on the list, and we have mostly new players, because that's how the Heisman race has been really all season. As we take a look at the slate for today, here is week 7. We've got the Red River rivalry between Texas and Oklahoma. Some other very interesting matchups down the board here as well. A lot of big-time ACC games. Week 8, there are 2 games that really stand out. TCU and Houston, both undefeated in the Big 12. And then, of course, the big-time rivalry between Ohio State and Michigan. Why they're playing against each other in Week 8, I have no idea, but they're playing against each other pretty early in the season. And then here's Week 9. This is maybe the biggest slate of games. Notre Dame, Oregon's going to be fun. Penn State, Ohio State's going to be really good, too. A lot of fun matchups these next 3 weeks that I'm really excited to dive into. So let's start here with Week 7. We're going to open things up in the Big 12. Number 21, TCU, is undefeated, and they're facing off against UCF, a team who had pretty high expectations this season and has been a little bit disappointing. The Horned Frogs are looking to keep it rolling here in this matchup. Their offense is playing well. Their defense is playing well. There's a reason why they're currently 5-0 and a real threat for the college football playoff, and they would keep things moving today. Sterling Yorkshire, the senior quarterback, had a nice day, connecting here with a touchdown for the tight end Mario Hommeler, who's been one of the best tight ends in the country. Running back Harry Stewart had another good game as well, as TCU takes the win 42-35. I know that was a pretty close game. I think UCF is a really tough opponent, but the Horned Frogs are playing well. Sterling Yorkshire throwing for 4 touchdowns in this matchup. UCF gave it a good fight. Nolan Mitchell II throwing for 3 scores. He was quite solid in this game. I think UCF is better than their record suggests. Next up, we've got the Red River rivalry between Texas and Oklahoma. This is one of our 2 games of the week for Week 7, with 72% of voters predicting Oklahoma to win. Last year when these 2 teams played each other, Oklahoma won by 52, so I think Texas has a little chip on their shoulder, and the Longhorns played a lot better than they did last year, let me tell you. This ended up being a really exciting matchup. Texas quarterback Onyx St. James had a really strong performance, had some very nice throws in this matchup, but a late push in the second half would lead Oklahoma to ultimately prevailing. Junior quarterback Romeo Coloci is really settling in, and he has made quite the chemistry with senior wideout Bryce Berry III, who could very well be the top receiver off the board in this year's draft, especially if he keeps playing the way he has been over these past few weeks. Oklahoma gets the win, but Texas only loses by 3 instead of by 52, like they did last season. Romeo Coloci threw for 4 touchdowns. He did turn the ball over twice, but he had some really good throws in this game, and Bryce Berry absolutely balled out. Onyx St. James was efficient, completing 68% of his passes. He ran for 2 scores as well. I feel like Washington and Barracon need to get the ball more than 7 times, though. The Ohio State University, coming off their first loss last week against Wisconsin, are going to be hosting the Michigan State Spartans here at the Shoe. Michigan State's a pretty weird team, and well, this ended up being a really weird game. Ohio State scored, I'm pretty sure, 3 points last week against Michigan. So what do they do this week? They drop a 50-burger against the Spartans, ultimately winning 50-31. Ohio State's offense completely clicked. They fired on all cylinders, unlike last week. And I think they're ready for their matchup against Michigan. Should be a fun one. Marco Brumley played well, as did Mookie Davis. As for Michigan State, I have some complaints with them. Joshua Calico and Jalen Dunbar need the ball more. This is one of the best running back tandems in the country. I know Michigan State's a pass-first team, but I feel like Joshua Calico in specific is kind of being wasted here. He only had 14 touches, and he scored 4 times. He is really good. Nebraska's honestly quite underrated, and they've got a chance to prove themselves here today against the USC Trojans, who are currently ranked number 11 in the nation. Despite USC being ranked way higher than Nebraska, I think these two teams are pretty even, and it certainly played out that way. Both offenses really performed well in this one, but ultimately, senior quarterback Jeff McCoy was able to lead Nebraska to the win, catapulting the Cornhuskers into the top 25. Nebraska is a real threat in the Big Ten West. Obviously, USC, Oregon, and Notre Dame lead that conference, but Nebraska's kind of a sleeping giant. They're a legitimately good team who could be a sleeper for the college football playoff. 35-28 your final. The Cornhuskers take it home. Scotty Kimbrell had a solid day. USC was able to run the ball decently like they normally do. They are a great rushing offense. But Jeffrey McCoy was just too much to stop. And they've got some ballers on this offense. D'Anthony Ford, Nelly Boskets. Both of those guys are going to be future pros. Number 1, Clemson facing off against the Louisville Cardinals. Louisville was pretty bad last season, and they've looked a lot better this year, largely because of the development of sophomore quarterback Prince Parks, who has taken a major step up this season for the Cardinals. And he had another good day today, connecting with a beautiful touchdown pass here for Hunter Creighton. However, Louisville still got smacked because Clemson right now is the best team in college football. Cade Hutchinson looks like he is going to be the number 1 pick. Minnesota Viking fans, I hope you're ready because this is probably going to be your new quarterback going forward. Hutchinson had an unbelievable performance, throwing for 4 touchdowns. He only threw 2 incompletions the entire game as Clemson wins 49-28. Cade Hutchinson is that dude. He is unbelievable. A passer rating of 282 in this game to go along with his 4 passing scores, 366 passing yards. Not to mention, he ran for a touchdown as well. All the receivers are playing well. I mean, this Clemson team looks unstoppable right now. Prince Parks had a nice day for Louisville, throwing for 2 scores, but Louisville was not able to stop Cade Hutchinson and the Tigers. Number 12, Florida has lost 2 in a row, trying to get back on the win column here against the LSU Tigers. This ended up being a low-scoring defensive battle. Florida was down late in the 4th quarter, but a touchdown here from the backup running back, Tundrick Suggs, will put them ahead by 5, giving LSU the ball back. 19-14 your score, and Thomas Toromenko would be intercepted by Donovan Bambo, who would take it to the house for a pick 6 as Florida survives the upset bid 26-14 against LSU. Thomas Toromenko did not play well. He is continuing to have growing pains here as the LSU quarterback. Ernie Capellar, pretty quiet for his standards. Elijah Bryant, very solid day on the ground for the Gators. 4-1 Mississippi State has one of the most fun and explosive offenses in the country. They're headed up to Minnesota to take on the Golden Gophers, who just upset number 1 Notre Dame in South Bend a week ago. Would Minnesota keep their momentum in this matchup? No, they would not, as their defense got completely picked apart by senior quarterback DeAndre Smith, who's continuing to look more and more like a possible first-round pick the way he's been throwing the football this season and just making plays as a passer. Romeo Gardner, number 3, the wideout, looks like he could be the top receiver off the board with his production this year as Mississippi State wins it 48-27. Kane Thompson was pretty mediocre for the Gophers. Riley Novell got the ball 9 times, which is malpractice. He did have 5 catches, though, leading the team in receiving by a wide margin. DeAndre Smith throwing for 5 touchdowns. He balled out. Chris Scruggs had 2, as did Romeo Gardner. Number 13, Arkansas heads to Columbia to take on the Gamecocks of South Carolina. It's been a very up and down season, really, for both of these teams. Arkansas, of course, led by their running back, Cannon McMullen, who was a Heisman finalist last year, hasn't been as good this year. He's taken a little bit to get things going. But he got it going today, all right. McMullen rushing for over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns in this one, leading the Razorbacks to the win, 45-24. Marco Prince with probably his worst game of the season. He's been really good this year, but didn't perform today. South Carolina really didn't spread the ball around. Braylon Murphy only got it 8 times, and then Taylor had 12 of the 13 receptions. As for Arkansas, they ran for nearly 500 yards as a team. McMullen with 258. The quarterback, Kader Sissoko, had 115, and Raheem Rocket Jr. added 90 of his own. Undefeated, number 24 ranked Houston is hosting the Iowa State Cyclones. Iowa State really not that good of a team towards the bottom of the Big 12, but they gave Houston everything they could bargain for today. Young sophomore quarterback Stephen King II had a pretty solid day here for the Cyclones. And on the flip side, Kane Sanders had probably his worst game of the season. He still threw for about 350 yards and 3 touchdowns, but he was also picked off 3 times, and Sanders had not thrown an interception this season prior to this game. This late touchdown from wide receiver Kramer Guildford would put Houston up 31-27 with about a minute to go on the clock. Iowa's going to need a big play here from the offense as Stephen King takes a shot downfield, and it is dropped! The Iowa State receiver had it in his hands, but he couldn't make the play. Very next snap, Stephen King goes to the same guy, and this time he catches it for a game-winning touchdown. Iowa State upsets Houston 34-31. Kane Sanders, not his best performance, turning the ball over 3 times in the loss. Houston is still a really good team, but there is a little bit less, I guess, excitement with their game next week against TCU. Still very much looking forward to that. Number 18, Pitt, has underperformed this season. They're headed to Chapel Hill to face off against the University of North Carolina. This one was all about the Tar Heels on offense. They threw the ball left and right, soaring through the air, and they ran it down Pitt's throats. Jamison Watson and Jalen West both had good performances on the ground. North Carolina winning big over the Pitt Panthers. As Pitt falls out of the top 25, North Carolina moves up to 23. Warren Bishop right now just isn't that guy. He is not performing well throwing the football. He's a first-year starter. He's a sophomore. He's got time to figure things out, but he is not playing well right now. Virginia Tech and Duke, our other game of the week here in Durham. Despite being unranked and on the road, Virginia Tech is favored by 3.5. And the viewers agree. 56% of the votes are expecting Virginia Tech to win the game. The Hokies are led by the dynamic duo of sophomore quarterback DeAndre Jones and junior wide receiver Rashid Salid, and both players played out of their minds today. However, Duke quarterback Justin Tucker had a great game of his own. DeAndre Jones for Virginia Tech threw 4 touchdowns, so Tucker decided to one-up that and throw for 5. The Blue Devils get the win. They'll stay in the top 25 as Virginia Tech is no longer undefeated. 48-34, your final in favor of the Blue Devils. What a day for Tucker. 5 passing touchdowns. He ran for another one as well. DeAndre Jones was really good in this one, throwing for 4 scores. He did miss quite a few throws. Rashid Salid leading the way in receiving, but not enough to get the win for Virginia Tech. Tennessee has been a total disaster this year. They only have 1 win, trying to get some things working here, non-conference up in Washington against the Huskies. And this was an utter beatdown in favor of the University of Washington. Keontae Jordan, the senior quarterback, had some very good throws in this game. And last year, we were talking about Tennessee as a top 5 team and a legit contender for the college football playoff. And this year, they have 1 win and probably will not make a bowl game. They might legitimately be the worst team in the SEC this season. 55-28, your final. Good win for Washington, who's now 4-1. They are legitimately a good team in the Pac-12, who's got a number of teams fighting at the top of that conference. As for Tennessee, Benjamin McKenzie threw for 4 touchdowns. Also got picked off 3 times. It just feels like there's something fundamentally wrong with Tennessee. And the final game for Week 7, we've got the reigning Big 12 champion, West Virginia Mountaineers, facing off against Baylor in a Big 12 title game rematch. West Virginia beat Baylor twice last season, including killing them in the Big 12 championship game. And I think Baylor had a little chip on their shoulder because of that. They were out for revenge, and they dominated the Mountaineers in this one. Forrest Holloway with a pretty solid day. Baylor is a run-first team. I really wish Forrest Holloway was on a different team where he could flourish more as a passer. Why can't we have trades in college football? Imagine, like, Forrest Holloway on Michigan State, swap him for their running back Joshua Calico, put him on Baylor. That'd be so perfect. As for West Virginia, they're 2-4. They're really not playing well. With all the great quarterbacks in this draft class, we've got guys like Jose Alvaro not playing well and seeing their stocks slip. Taking a look at some of the other scores around the country, Middle Tennessee State and Notre Dame both win big. Oregon with a nice win over San Jose State. Georgia beats UMass. South Alabama beats ECU. Rutgers drops 59 against Virginia. Auburn with a nice win. Syracuse now ranked with a nice win, and then Alabama and Michigan State blow out their respective opponents. As for some of the other games around the rest of the country, Air Force loses to Oregon State. Why was Air Force the favorite in the Pac-12? I don't really know. Missouri drops 56 on Texas Tech. Army's really starting to play well after a slow start to the season. Memphis blows out Navy. That's kind of a surprise. FIU upsets Illinois. Indiana drops 56 on Wisconsin. And keep in mind, Wisconsin's defense shut down Ohio State last week. SMU beats Northwestern in overtime. I think I was kind of wrong about Northwestern being a sleeper. And then going down the board even further, Washington State drops 51 on Arizona State. Tulsa's playing good football. They beat Temple. Arizona undefeated. They beat Boise State. And then UCLA gets the better of their rival Cal. Looking at the AP poll, really not much movement. Penn State goes up from 7-4 on a bye week. But other than that, not a whole lot of craziness. There weren't many jaw-dropping upsets this week, other than maybe Iowa State over Houston. We do have 4 new ranked teams, with Nebraska, Mississippi State, North Carolina, and Syracuse all entering, with Pitt, Minnesota, Texas, and Houston dropping out of the top 25. As for the Heisman Watch, again, a lot of movement. I think we have 3 new people here. MJ Hill, who was not on the list going into the week, is now number 1. Keith Humphrey drops to 2. DR Antoine moves up to 3. Sidney McDonald goes down 1 spot. He is now number 4. And then Noel Hilaire, the running back out of Oregon, is on the Heisman Watch for the first time in his collegiate career, as he is now in 5th place. Last week we had 4 quarterbacks. This week we have 4 running backs. Players of the week, we have Brad Bell and Latavius Merrington, the quarterback out of Missouri, who won it back in week 5. Merrington's playing some great football, a transfer from Eastern Washington. He has adjusted very well to the FBS level. That'll bring us to week 8, and there are some big-time matchups here. TCU, Houston, I'm really excited to dive into. Even though Houston lost, that's still going to be a really big game. Of course, we got the big-time rivalry between Ohio State and Michigan at the Big House. That's going to be a fun game, and then there are plenty of other interesting matchups this week as well. So week 7, I feel like, was pretty quiet. There weren't many super surprising games, and there weren't much craziness. So because of that, week 8 decided to have doubled the craziness. This was by far the most exciting week of the year so far. Let's start with Rutgers and Virginia Tech. The Hokies coming off a loss last week, looking to get back on the win column, and that they would do. DeAndre Jones and Rashid Salid are continuing to carve up defenses like Thanksgiving turkey. Gobble, gobble. Big win for Tech as they take it home 48-21. Virginia Tech remains unranked while Rutgers still is in the top 25. I think Rutgers still deserves to be ranked, but I think Virginia Tech should be as well. DR Antoine only 11 carries. That's inexcusable. He needs the ball more. As for Virginia Tech, DeAndre Jones is that dude. Rashid Salid is that dude. One of our games of the week, we've got TCU and Houston. Keep in mind the polls were made before week 7 when Houston was undefeated. Houston, despite being favored, is the underdog according to the fans. 64% of the votes sided towards TCU. So let's take a look at these two teams because we didn't really deep dive them at the start of the season. Houston is led by quarterback Kane Sanders, who's a legitimate Heisman contender, and he's really raising his draft stock this season. He has been utterly fantastic for the Cougars. This team is an offense-first team. Their wide receiver, Kramer Gilliford, has been the best receiver in the country this year. He currently has 838 yards and 13 touchdowns. So if he keeps that up for the rest of the year, he'd be projected to finish with 26 receiving touchdowns. Well, Gildeford added 3 more today. He played out of his mind. Kane Sanders completely dotted up a really good TCU defense, and Houston's offense performed really well. Big day for Kane Sanders, elevating his Heisman stock as Houston's offense was great from start to finish. Let's take a look at the other side, though. TCU, this is a team led by their defense. They've got a bunch of future NFL players here with Matumbe Afolabe, Nate Amazu, who looks like a first-round pick, Roderick Williamson, Kamani Battle, so many good players here. Their offense isn't as solid, but still pretty good. Cade Brown was the starter last season, and he was quite good, but they decided to start Sterling Yorkshire this season, a decision that has really paid off. They've got some talented weapons with Harry Stewart, Vlade Divac, Jason Bell, and then going down the board, they've got the Alabama transfer, Griffin Weaver, who's not even eligible to play, and then some really good freshmen with Stokes and Diabate. Their best offensive player is tight end Mario Hummeler, who's been the best tight end in the country this season, and he finished with 3 touchdowns as well. Just like Houston's offense, TCU's offense played very, very well, and ultimately this game ended up being really close with both passing games dominating. It really came down to which team ran the ball better and dominated at the line of scrimmage. That team ended up being the TCU Horned Frogs with a big run late in the game from running back Harry Stewart. I mean, look at him just evading defenders like it's just nothing. TCU remains undefeated with the win over Houston, 38-35. The Horned Frogs jump all the way up to number 9 in the country. Kane Sanders played very well. His stock certainly improved today. And then Kramer Gildeford, my God, is he awesome. 16 receiving touchdowns through 7 games. Sterling Yorkshire was also really good, as was Harry Stewart. And then Mario Hummeler looks like he might be the number 1 tight end picked in this year's upcoming draft. What a game. Arizona is undefeated in the Pac-12. They're playing some great football, trying to keep it going here against a struggling Utah team. But the Utes came into Arizona, and their offense exploded. Sophomore quarterback Trenton McLaughlin threw for 5 touchdowns, 3 of which were caught by the speedy wide receiver Ashton Euluko. You might recognize that last name if you've been around the channel for a while. Euluko, also a sophomore. This is going to be a really fun duo for the Utah Utes going forward, as they would end up getting the win here over Arizona by the score of 35-31. The Wildcats look like the best team in the Pac-12 right now despite the loss. Kareem Kamara is really good, and Arizona is showing that they don't need Scotty Pickens to completely carry their offense like last year. Good win for Utah, good performance by McLaughlin and Euluko. Sticking to the Pac-12, we've got Washington, who they're right up there with Arizona as one of the best teams in the conference, taking on the Cal Golden Bears, who have been a little bit disappointing this season. Sophomore quarterback Rufus Motley really hasn't taken the leap I was hoping for, but he took that leap today, throwing for 3 touchdowns. He ran for 2 more as well. Rufus Motley had his best game as a Golden Bear, leading Cal to the upset over Washington. I still think Cal, on paper, is the most talented team in the Pac-12, and even though they've been a little bit disappointing to start the season at 4-3, I could really see them competing for the top of the conference towards the end of the season and competing for a playoff spot. Rufus Motley absolutely balled out. This was his coming out party, and I think it's only going to be a sign of things to come for Motley and the Golden Bears. On the other side, Keontae Jordan did not have his best performance as Washington loses their first conference game of the year. Number 2, Kentucky, coming off a bye week, heads to the Link here in the city of brotherly love to face off against the Temple Owls. On paper, this looks like an easy win for Kentucky. They've beaten 6 really good teams. Temple's not really good, but the Owls played really good today. Miles Akeyor, the quarterback, had some great throws, including that one. Let's go late in the game. Kentucky up by 4, Temple looking to get the win, and Miles Akeyor wants to do it himself. Akeyor is running loose on this Kentucky defense right now. Temple's going to need a touchdown with about 30 seconds to go. We'll see if they can punch it in or if Kentucky can get a stop here on 4th down. And Akeyor stumbles in for the score. Temple upsets number 2 Kentucky 34-31. Talk about an upset. Oh my goodness, this has got to be the shock of the year. Miles Akeyor leading the Owls to the victory, just their 2nd win of the season. Kentucky might have gotten a little bit complacent at the top of the rankings. Isaiah Gordon, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. He didn't lose the team the game, but he did miss a lot of throws in this one. Number 3, Middle Tennessee State has a chance to move up to number 2 with the Kentucky loss, but they've got a tough test here in Boca Raton, facing off against the Florida Atlantic Owls. We haven't really covered Middle Tennessee State this year, and I feel like that's been a good thing for them because they haven't had any super relevant games. This matchup ended up being a lot closer than advertised, but the Blue Raiders were able to survive with a late touchdown from Nehemiah Dalton. 28-25 your score, and the Blue Raiders are now ranked 2nd in college football, but a big test here nonetheless from Florida Atlantic. Drain Ignatius, the junior quarterback, threw for 3 touchdowns in this one. Nehemiah Dalton still playing out of his mind. Number 4, Penn State heads to the Hoosier State to face off against Indiana. I think the over-under at this game is set at about 110. These are two of the best offenses in the conference and two of the worst defenses in the conference. Well, as expected, we had an offensive battle. Penn State's offense picked up right where they left off from the last two episodes. Tight end Chad Johnson looks like he's one of the best players at his position in the country once again, just like last year. But Indiana stood toe-to-toe. The left-handed quarterback, Kennedy Newsfort, had some pretty good throws today, but Newsfort did his most damage on the ground, rushing for 2 touchdowns. Aaron Robinson had a nice day for the Nittany Lions. He had a good performance, as did Quentin Pickens, the running back for Indiana. Ultimately, Penn State's defense just got drained by trying to stop the Hoosier rushing attack, as 2 top 4 teams lose this week. An unbeaten Penn State now has their first loss of the year as Indiana beats them 38-31. I told you this week was crazy. Kennedy Newsfort, very efficient day, only missing 4 throws along with 2 rushing touchdowns. Then on the other side, Lyndon Kirkstead wasn't bad, but not as good as he's been. Penn State falls all the way to number 14. Number 13, Auburn heads to the Lone Star State to take on 2-4 Texas, who is in danger of having their season completely fall apart if they don't win this game. So Texas, their quarterback position's been an interesting one since the start of this series. Last year, they had Benedict Sparrow, who threw a lot of interceptions, and this year they have freshman Onyx St. James, who is pretty similar to Benedict Sparrow in terms of turning over the football. Well, St. James is really starting to play well, and this was his coming out party. Onyx St. James has arrived. Texas wins at 31-16. St. James with his best performance of his career, throwing for 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. And he was a force on the ground as well, as Texas is back in the top 25 at number 22, despite being under 500. Meanwhile, for Auburn, they're in a weird spot because they've been playing some good football as of recent, winners of 4 straight going into this matchup. But Sidney McDonald threw 2 interceptions, and as we look at Auburn's schedule, things are not going to get any easier. In their final 4 games, they have 3 top 5 opponents: Oklahoma, Georgia, and then Alabama in the Iron Bowl. That sounds pretty brutal. South Alabama has not been as good as they were last year. They've already lost a couple games, trying to get back on track as they face off against a struggling Tulane Green Wave team. This ended up being a blowout, but not in favor of South Alabama. Tulane ended up winning this game big, and it feels like the South Alabama Cinderella run it's over. They had a great push. They obviously made the national championship game last year, but South Alabama looks like a flash in the pan from last season going to this year as Tulane wins 38-21. Tulane is not a good team really at all, and they completely blew them out. South Alabama quarterback Q.J. Reddings was picked off 4 times, although he also had nearly 400 yards, but he missed 27 throws. Tulane, if you remember last year, at one point, they were ranked in the top 5. They were right up there with South Alabama and Middle Tennessee State as amongst the best Group 5 teams. Middle Tennessee State's still at the top, but not these two. These two have completely fallen off the face of the earth. And the game of the week, pun intended, we've got the Ohio State University headed to the Big House to face off against Michigan. These are 2 of the best teams in the Big Ten East, and they have a chance to rise to the top with Penn State losing earlier today. Unsurprisingly, this was one of our games of the week. Despite being 8.5-point home favorites, 60% of the voters went with Ohio State. They believe after Ohio State got embarrassed last year against Michigan that Ohio State's coming out for blood. And guess what? They were right. Ohio State put the pedal to the metal right from the start, and they did not look back, completely demolishing the Michigan Wolverines. If you guys remember last year, I think Ohio State was up like 28-0 against Michigan, and Michigan ended up winning the game. That ended up winning Michigan the division and led them to the playoffs. So Ohio State had a lot to play for today, and, well, they showed it, winning 37-14, completely killing the Wolverines really right from the start of the game. No mercy from the Buckeyes, who are now ranked number 11. Bartholomew Blount really has not played all that well this season, I've got to be honest. I still think he's going to be a first-round pick, but with how guys like Isaiah Gordon and Kane Sanders and DeAndre Smith are playing, Blount is no sure thing to be the second quarterback off the board. On the flip side, Marco Brunley was solid, so was Mookie Davis. The defense was great for the Buckeyes. Really everything clicked here for Ohio State. They had a lot to play for, and they showed it with a big win over Michigan. Is that going to be what happens in real life this coming weekend? We'll have to see. So a very exciting Week 8. A lot of really fun matchups. Two top 4 teams with Kentucky and Penn State both getting upset by Temple and Indiana, respectively. Looking at some of the other scores, Florida and Baylor with nice wins. USC beats Northwestern. Duke with a good win. Clemson barely beats Maryland by 7. My Northwestern sleeper pick still looks kind of bad. They lose to USC. Oregon blows out UCLA. Syracuse is now ranked. Miami with a close win over Virginia. And then Florida State, Oklahoma, and Georgia blow out their opponents. Looking at the rest of college football, Georgia Tech stinks. Iowa also stinks. Tennessee stinks as well. They are now 1-6. What an utter fall from grace. Going down the board, UCF and West Virginia both back on the win column as they beat Texas Tech and Cincinnati, respectively. Washington State's playing some good football. They beat Colorado. Memphis is still playing some bad football. They lose to South Florida. Michigan State beats Illinois. And then going down the board even further, Tulsa 6-1. Those guys are good in the American Athletic Conference. Missouri beats Kansas State. And going down even further, Central Michigan's a good team this year. They look like the favorites in the MAC. Mississippi State loses to Texas A&M. Air Force still stinks. And that's really about it. So there's going to be a lot of movement in the top 25. Obviously, with two top 4 teams losing, that feels pretty much inevitable. And that was certainly the case here today. Clemson remains number 1. Middle Tennessee State number 2. With Alabama, Georgia, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, and Oregon all taking big steps up. TCU moves from 15 to 9. They are now in the top 10. Michigan drops to 13. Penn State drops to 14. Kentucky drops all the way to 15, with Texas and Baylor now ranked, and Mississippi State and South Alabama both dropping out. Again, plenty of movement once again in the Heisman watch because there's like 30 guys who still have a chance to win the award. Noel Hilaire is now in first place. Keith Humphrey still in second, with Kane Sanders, Sterling Yorkshire, and Justin Tucker now in the top 5. If you told me those 3 quarterbacks would be the highest 3 quarterbacks in the Heisman race at any point in the season, I would have said you're crazy, but here we are. Players of the week, Georgia corner Nigel Deacon. Then on offense, it's Justin Tucker, who had 5 touchdowns last week, one-ups himself with 6 this week. So now that we're over halfway through the season, the first college football playoff rankings are now out. These rankings are made by the committee who ultimately chooses who will be in the college football playoff. Again, keep in mind, there will be a 12-team playoff this year. The Power 5 conference champions, the best Group 5 conference champion, and then 6 at-large bids. So keep that in mind. It doesn't really matter too much since we still have like 6-7 weeks to go, but just so you can get an idea where the committee's at, there you go. Let's take a look at Week 9. I think Week 9 is the deepest slate of games amongst the 3 weeks today. There are a lot of really fun matchups, particularly in the ACC. Duke Pitt, Miami Rutgers, North Carolina Virginia Tech. Clemson can get revenge on NC State after that disaster of the game last year. Notre Dame Oregon, and then Penn State Ohio State are the 2 games I'm most excited about this week personally. I'm pretty sure one of those games was voted as the game of the week by the fans. Texas TCU is going to be really fun too. Big test for the Horned Frogs to see if they can match up with the talented Texas team. Let's start with number 2, Middle Tennessee State. They are hosting the Navy Midshipmen. These are the 2 best defenses in college football scoring-wise. Nobody has allowed less points per game this season than Middle Tennessee State. Right behind them, with the second least amount of points per game, is Navy. So you should expect this to be an ugly defensive football game, and that is exactly what ended up happening. The Navy Midshipmen dominated to start the game with a pick 6 from the safety, Matt Burnett. They ended up leading 17-0 after halftime. Middle Tennessee State is in real danger of losing their first regular season game of the entire series. Keep in mind, in the second half, their offense put up some good plays here, trying to keep their undefeated season alive with a great touchdown pass to Lufer Lexerus. And then in the fourth quarter, with about 7 minutes to go, Nehemiah Dalton Hiles one in to make it 17-14. Navy would get the ball back, and they would not give it back. The Midshipmen ran the ball efficiently for 7 minutes straight. Running back Torian Wilson and quarterback Chuck Barton just ran it down Middle Tennessee State's throats. And after a season and a half of going undefeated in the regular season with 18 consecutive regular season wins, the streak is finally over for Middle Tennessee State as they are the last team to lose a regular season game in the series. Navy wins 17-14. They are now ranked at number 18. Middle Tennessee State surprisingly still in the top 10. I would have thought with Penn State and Kentucky dropping down into the teens last week that Middle Tennessee State would have gone farther. I guess the committee wants to give them respect after they were really good last year, so I understand that. Good win for Navy. Next up, we've got number 10, Arkansas. They have 3 losses and are ranked in the top 10. I don't really get it. Last year, the committee was very kind to Arkansas as well. They're facing off against 5-1 Arizona, coming off their first loss of the season. So obviously, we all know former Arizona wide receiver Scotty Pickens. He's great. He has a younger cousin named Charlie Pickens, who also plays wide receiver for the Wildcats. He hasn't been quite as good as his older cousin, but he is still a pretty talented player, and today was his coming out party. Charlie Pickens caught 5 passes for 204 yards and 2 touchdowns, looking like cousin Scotty in this one. Kareem Kamara with another really good game throwing the football. Kareem Kamara is an awesome quarterback. It doesn't matter who you have at receiver, whether it's Scotty Pickens, Charlie Pickens, or even Charlie Brown. 38-28, Arizona with the win, and they are now in the top 25 at 22. Arkansas drops all the way to 23, despite a big game from running back Cannon McMullen. Good performance here from the Wildcats, who sit atop the Pac-12 with a couple other teams as well. Keep in mind, somebody in the Pac-12 has to make the playoff. Why not Kareem Kamara and the Arizona Wildcats? Good win for Arizona. Next up, we have a pretty intriguing matchup here between Miami and Rutgers in the ACC. 2 pretty evenly matched teams. Rutgers coming off a bad loss last week against Virginia Tech, trying to get things in order. This ended up being a really good game, but it started off pretty rough for Rutgers with a pick 6 in the opening minute by Miami cornerback Curtis Cook, who could be a pretty high pick in next year's draft. Rutgers was quick to respond, and ultimately this ended up being a pretty high-scoring game with both offensive units really clicking. Sean Ferwerda, the Rutgers quarterback, had one of his better games of the year, again, minus the turnover. Dior Antoine, again, was kind of quiet. He didn't score once again in this matchup, which is rare for him because he usually finds the end zone. But Rutgers was able to spread the love, get some of the other guys involved, showing that they're not a one-dimensional team led by one really good player and everybody else is average. As for Miami, quarterback Scooter Young Jr. is continuing his breakout season with some really good throws and really good runs in this one. Scooter actually had one of his worst performances of the year, which is mainly because he's had a lot of good ones this year and could be a pretty high pick in next year's draft. That rushing touchdown will ultimately bring the game into overtime, tied at 34. Miami gets the ball first, and Scooter ends up getting sacked, so Miami has to go for a field goal. Kick is good. Hurricanes lead by 3. Rutgers does not want Miami to get the ball back, and they would not let them. A good run here by Dior Antoine would set a short passing touchdown from Ferwerda to Paris Richardson, as Rutgers gets back on the win column with a nice victory against Miami, 42-37. Rutgers, moving into the ACC, knew they would need to make a big adjustment, and clearly they have lived up to it, as the Scarlet Knights have had no problem in their new conference. As for Miami, they remain ranked at 21. I feel like Miami's painfully average. They're not that good, but they're not bad. They're just kind of there. Number 19, North Carolina heads to Blacksburg to take on, again, one of my big sleeper teams this year, Virginia Tech, who has proven me right. But they've got a big test this week against the North Carolina offense, and they failed the test pretty miserably. Graham Fisher threw for 6 touchdowns in this one. North Carolina's offense is so good, and I think this really could be a sleeper team for the college football playoff. North Carolina was really good at the start of last season up until Graham Fisher got hurt, and although their backup quarterback was pretty good, North Carolina just wasn't really the same team. So now that Fisher is healthy, UNC looks really good. They win 56-30. DeAndre Jones not playing as well as he has been. Rashid Salid out of the end zone for one of the first times of the season. And then, again, Graham Fisher, 6 touchdowns. North Carolina's right up there as one of the best teams in the ACC. I think Clemson's in Tier 1, and then Tier 2, you've got a lot of teams fighting for spots like FSU, Duke, Rutgers, and then North Carolina's right in that mix as well. Number 5, Oklahoma heads to Jordan-Hare to face off against number 20, Auburn. The Tigers coming off a loss last week against Texas, trying to get the better of Texas's Red River rival. As we kind of talked about in the matchup against Texas, Oklahoma quarterback Romeo Coloci is really figuring things out throughout the year. I feel like he's improved every game, which says a lot. And again, his connection with Bryce Berry III is something else. Berry looks like the favorite to be the top receiver off the board in this year's class, although there are a lot of good ones, so it's certainly not a sure thing it ends up being him. But Oklahoma would get the win here over Auburn, 45-35. Auburn now unranked for the first time this season, while Oklahoma jumps up a spot with Middle Tennessee State losing. They are now number 4. Good victory for the Sooners. Coloci, 3 touchdowns. Most importantly, he did not turn over the ball once, and he had a pretty solid day on the ground as well, leading the team in rushing. And then Bryce Berry, he is him. 10 catches, 200 yards, and 2 touchdowns. One of our games of the week, number 6 Notre Dame heads to Autzen to take on number 7 Oregon. Notre Dame favored by half a point, so it's pretty much a pick'em, and 68% of the voters decided to go with the Oregon Ducks. This game ended up being as good as advertised. I think both of these teams going into this game, I thought of them as college football playoff contenders, and I leave this game believing that both of them are, well, college football playoff contenders. MJ Hill continues a Heisman-esque season, and personally, as of now, he is my personal pick to win the Heisman. On the other side, Oregon's offense was great. Number 88, Tommy Porter, their slot receiver, kind of a no-name on this offense, caught 17 passes for 210 yards. 17! That's a lot. Noel Hilaire, the current Heisman favorite at running back, also had a pretty good game today as well, although he was slightly outperformed by MJ Hill. This touchdown by Hilaire put the Ducks up by 4 points late in the game, but MJ Hill had something to say about that. Hill with his Heisman moment, striking the pose in the end zone for the game-winning touchdown. Notre Dame beats Oregon 34-31, and they jump up to number 3 in the poll while Oregon falls to 11. I think this game is more indicative on Notre Dame than Oregon. I think Notre Dame's really good. I think Oregon's really good. I think both of these teams are going to be in the playoff when it's all said and done. But this certainly helps Notre Dame's chances of getting into the Big Ten championship because those are the 2 best teams in Big Ten West. Number 14, Penn State, coming off a big loss, heads to the Shoe to face off against Ohio State, coming off a big win last week against Michigan. Will Ohio State keep the train rolling, and will Penn State keep on falling? Yes, that's exactly what would happen. What a day for the Buckeyes, beating Michigan by 23 last week, and then beating Penn State by 24 today. 48-24 your final, a big win for the Buckeyes, who look like the best team in the Big Ten East right now. As for Penn State, the hype train has taken a massive halt and is falling off the tracks. Penn State still is a solid shot of making the college football playoff. They are ranked number 17, and I still think they're really good, but they're just not as good as we thought they were going into the episode. Shout out to Ohio State, man, beating both Michigan and Penn State. The Buckeyes look like the favorite to make it out of the Big Ten East and play Notre Dame in the Big Ten Championship if everything holds up. Number 13, Michigan, coming off a bad loss last week, heads to Champaign to take on the 1-win Illinois Fighting Illini. I think Illinois is better than their record suggests. Michigan didn't game plan as such, and that backfired because Illinois' offense played really well in this one. Michigan just doesn't look as good as they did last year, flat out. Now, Michigan still made this super competitive. Bartholomew Blount played fine. He wasn't good, but he wasn't really bad either. He didn't help his stock today, put it that way, but he didn't drop too far either. Illinois' wide receiver, Shahid Zahid, the best player on their offense, had a nice day, scoring 2 touchdowns. This late score by Casey Aceron would put the game in overtime. Certainly not what Michigan had in mind going into the game. Got to finish Illinois off here in the extra period as they would start with another touchdown here from Casey Aceron, his 3rd. That's a hat trick, putting Michigan up by 7. Illinois would get it back here on a 4th down. Derek Watson scrambling with it, and the pass would be broken up in the secondary. Michigan survives the upset bid, 45-38 in overtime. Not a good win, though, for Michigan. And the Wolverines, as I said earlier, I just don't think they're as good as they were last year. They don't look like that same explosive team. And I don't know what it is. I think they still could get in the playoff pretty easily, and I think they can beat anybody, but they can also lose to just about anybody, as shown here today. Number 22, Texas, heads to Fort Worth to face off against number 9, TCU. A big test here for the Horned Frogs. They've got to show they are legit. And this ended up being a pretty competitive game for the first, 10 minutes or so. Harry Stewart started the game off with a nice rushing touchdown for TCU, and that's about all the fun they had today. Onyx St. James had another masterful performance here for the Longhorns, scoring 5 times, 4 in the air, 1 on the ground. Onyx St. James utterly dominated, and although he started his season off pretty slowly, he's another guy who's improving every week, and it looks like Texas has made an upgrade at quarterback, and Benedict Sparrow declaring for the draft was really the best thing that could have happened to them. Texas would take a 28-10 lead at halftime, and at this point, I think it's fair to say that Texas might be back.
We're back!
Oh, you thought I was being serious? Texas ain't back, folks. TCU comes out the gates storming in the second half. Sterling Yorkshire, the quarterback, had some brilliant throws after halftime. TCU ran it down Texas's throats. The Horned Frogs looked like a totally different team in the second half, and they looked like they had a real shot to pull out the comeback and win, down by 4 with about a minute and a half to go. They give it to the running back, Harry Stewart, who breaks tackles, fights his way for the end zone. Texas is not back. TCU with a major comeback. They win it 35-38. Sterling Yorkshire throwing for 2 scores today. Harry Stewart runs in for 2. Onyx St. James is not to blame for the loss. He wasn't great in the second half. He did throw a bad interception, but it's not his fault that the team lost. But still, what an embarrassing choke by Texas. One of our other games of the week, Kentucky facing off against Mississippi State. Both teams have added losses since the poll was out, but overall, Kentucky seems like the overwhelming favorite. And, I mean, with how good these offenses have been, I think there's a reasonable shot we could get over 100 points scored. And that is exactly what happened. Over 100 points were scored in this game. Isaiah Gordon threw for 6 touchdowns. He ran for 2 more. So that is 8 touchdowns if you're counting at home, as Kentucky would get back on the win column. They beat Mississippi State 62-41. Both of these quarterbacks utterly dominated today. DeAndre Smith in the loss, 373 yards and 4 touchdowns. I think that's pretty good, if you ask me. Romeo Gardner, again, looking more and more like a first-round pick. He had 235 yards, but nobody was more impressive than Isaiah Gordon. 21 of 24, 414 passing yards, 88 rushing yards. So that is over 500 yards of offense and 8 touchdowns. That's one of the best performances I've ever seen, flat out. Isaiah Gordon, I think, has passed Bartholomew Blount as QB2 in this year's draft. Our final game of the day, we head down to Tuscaloosa. Number 3, Alabama, facing off against 1-win Tennessee. The storyline here isn't really the game itself, because Alabama blew out Tennessee, as we all expect, because Tennessee stinks. I think more so the storyline is that Alabama feels like a sleeping giant at the top of the polls. We haven't really talked about Alabama a whole lot this year, but they are a legitimate contender to win it all. They have quite the story with their starting quarterback Bryson Byrne getting injured early in the season. Troy Davenport has had to come in, and through 7 games, Davenport has thrown 2 touchdowns. Yet Alabama is ranked number 2 in the poll. They win 49-21. Troy Davenport with his 2nd passing touchdown of the year. As you know, Alabama is all about the ground game. Kyle McCloskey balled out, along with Quincy Murphy. Then on the other side, Benjamin McKenzie was fine, but Tennessee is just awful. My Lord. Let's take a look at the other results around the country in Week 9. A lot of big-time games, a lot of big-time upsets, and then we'll sort of recap the episode and talk about what we could see next time around. Southern Miss is now ranked. Nebraska with a good win. Florida State blows out Louisville. Clemson gets revenge on NC State. Baylor blows out Vanderbilt. Baylor's quietly 6-1. They look really good again. Pitt upsets Duke. That's a surprise. USC blows out Wisconsin. So after Wisconsin upsets Ohio State last episode, Ohio State plays really well and Wisconsin plays like garbage. Moving down the board, I think we recapped all of those games, and then looking at some of the other games around the country. Oklahoma State drops 56 on Minnesota. Houston back on the win column as they beat Texas Tech. South Alabama loses again, this time to UAB. West Virginia's won 2 in a row. They beat BYU. Georgia Tech wins their first in-conference game. They beat Virginia Tech by 1. Temple wins another SEC game, beating LSU. Washington beats Arizona State 24-17. UCF loses to Kansas State. South Carolina beats A&M. Air Force still sucks. They get blown out by Cal. That's embarrassing. Again, why was Air Force the favorite in the Pac-12 at the beginning of the season? Syracuse's stay in the top 25 is over after 1 week. They lose to Maryland. Cincinnati beats Kansas. Missouri beats Iowa State. Washington State 5-0 in the Pac-12. Look out for the Cougars. They are quietly really good. Iowa finally with a win. USF with a good win over UConn. And then Stanford beats Colorado. So as we look at the polls, got to give credit to Clemson. We've seen a lot of movement with the number 1 spot this year, but Clemson entered the episode number 1, and they will leave it number 1. Alabama number 2, Notre Dame number 3. Only 2 undefeated teams are left here in college football, with Middle Tennessee State losing. Clemson and TCU are the only teams without a loss this year. Navy, Arizona, and then Southern Miss will enter the top 25 for the first time this year, with Auburn, Texas, and Syracuse dropping out. As it's been all year, we have plenty of movement in the Heisman race. Kane Sanders with a 5-touchdown performance against Texas Tech. He's back in first. Anthony Raymond now in second. Noel Hilaire still above of MJ Hill. They are 3 and 4. And then Sterling Yorkshire from TCU is number 5. He goes down despite the big comeback win. Players of the week, Curtis O'Brien on defense, and then obviously Isaiah Gordon on offense with maybe the best individual performance any player has had this series. Right up there with Dior Antoine in week 4 against Memphis. I feel like Gordon should still be in the top 5 for the Heisman. As for the college football playoff rankings, Notre Dame is ahead of Alabama. That's really the only super notable thing here, I would say. Other than that, pretty similar to the current rankings. Again, these don't matter too much, but it's more so interesting to see where the committee currently has all of these teams at this spot of the year. So as we end the episode, let's talk about some teams whose stocks are up, stock is down, and teams to watch out for. Alabama looks like a legitimate national title contender. Bryson Burns going to be back soon. I'm curious to see how they'll manage that. Baylor 6-1. They are quietly looking really good in the Big 12. North Carolina also with only 1 loss, playing very well in the ACC. Ohio State is the biggest winner today, beating both Michigan and Penn State, actually blowing both of those schools out by a lot. TCU looks like a legitimate title contender. We'll see how good they really are next week against Alabama. As for teams whose stock go down, Auburn, their playoff chances look like they're about dead. Houston loses 2 games today, and although I don't feel any lower on Houston as a team, I think their playoff chances are also just about dead because I have a hard time thinking they'll be able to get past both TCU and Baylor in the Big 12 South. Houston could go undefeated the rest of the way, be 10-2, and probably still not get an at-large bid. They certainly wish they were in the North, where they'd probably make it out of that division, although Missouri is a really good team as well. Michigan did not play all that well today. They still have a good shot getting in with only 2 losses, but they just didn't look great. Same can be said for Penn State. They went 0-2 today. They still can get in, but they have much less margin for error. Middle Tennessee State finally losing a regular season game. They still look like the best Group 5 team, so they still have the inside track to get in. South Alabama, on the other hand, they stink. And then the team to really watch out for, Washington State, 6-1, 5-0 in conference. Somebody from the Pac-12 has to get in. Why not Washington State? I'm excited to cover them more in the next episode. Before we wrap up today's episode, let's take a look at some of the other games from weeks 10 to 12 that could be pretty fun in the next episode. Week 10's got some good matchups. I think Michigan-USC is going to be really interesting. It'll be a big opportunity to see where Michigan really is because they could really use a strong win. Oregon, Minnesota, Oklahoma, Mississippi State, Navy, Notre Dame. The 2 games I'm really excited about, we've got Georgia and Florida. We didn't talk about really either of those teams today because, well, neither of them had super big games. And then Alabama, TCU. We'll get to see how good TCU is and also how good Alabama is as well. That's going to be a really fun matchup. Florida State, Miami should be fun too. And then going into week 11, got some tough tests here. A lot of non-conference games as well in there. Louisville, Kentucky should be fun. Those 2 teams are rivals. Michigan, Michigan State, Houston, Baylor, and then at the end, Florida State, Clemson, That'll be the game of the week. Week 12, Middle Tennessee State, South Alabama, Oregon, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Indiana, Nebraska, Notre Dame, Michigan, Penn State. As you can see, a lot of fun Big 10 games here in week 12. Baylor, TCU, I think will be really interesting. Georgia, Auburn as well should be fun. And the Mississippi State, Alabama, that could be a trap game for the Crimson Tide. So that'll wrap up the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. Certainly a fun one. Next time we've got weeks 10 through 12. Again, if you want to join the NCAA Next Up Pick'em, make sure to go join the Discord server. The link is in the description. All right, that'll wrap it up. Hope you all enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're new. Peace out.